Far away in a quiet corner of the universe, a dying civilization called the Valorian Alliance sent out a desperate call for help. They had once been proud and peaceful beings known for their art and science. Their glowing crystalline bodies shimmered with light, and their minds worked together in perfect harmony. For thousands of years they had built cities among the stars, floating above beautiful blue and silver worlds that shone like gems in the dark sky. But peace had made them soft, and when the enemy came, they were not ready. The enemy was called the Null, a swarm of mechanical predators created long ago by another forgotten race. The machines had no emotion, no mercy, and no weakness. They spread like a storm, consuming planets, breaking them apart for their metals and energy. When the Null arrived in the Valorian system, their fleets shattered within days, their defense grids fell one by one, and soon entire worlds burned under the cold light of mechanical fire. The Valorians gathered their last strength and built a signal beacon the size of a moon. They poured their knowledge into one final message, a cry for help that they believed would reach any kind and noble race across the galaxies. Their signal was encoded with hope and compassion, for they believed that only a civilization of peace would hear and answer it. But their understanding of the universe was small compared to the infinite dark. Their signal traveled for years, crossing nebulae, wormholes, and voids until, at last, it reached a distant region that no alien had dared to enter, a region filled with chaotic radiation, deadly asteroids, and rumors of a strange race that lived on a planet called Earth-on. That small blue world humans went about their daily lives unaware that something from the farthest corner of the cosmos had just reached them. At a small outpost deep in space, orbiting near the edge of the solar system, a few tired scientists monitored static signals as part of a forgotten project. The signal came quietly, hidden under noise, but one technician named Aaron noticed a pattern. He thought it was interference at first, but when he cleaned the data and translated the pulses, he realized it was not random. It was language, and not just any language. It carried emotion he could almost feel. Sadness and fear hidden inside the code. He ran to his supervisor, showing the data, and soon the message reached the Terran Union Council. The council gathered the best linguists and scientists to decode it. The message said, "Help us, we are dying. Our worlds are burning. We are the Valorians. We seek life, not war. If there is kindness in the stars, please answer us." The words were repeated again and again, ending with coordinates that pointed to a star system far beyond human maps. Many thought it was a trap. Some believed it was a test by other powers, but others felt something deeper. Humanity had always been divided, yet in moments of crisis they came together. The council argued for days. Finally, Admiral Reyes, an old soldier who had seen many wars, stood up and said, "If there is life out there crying for help, we cannot ignore it. We are human. We survived because we never turned away from struggle, and now we will show the stars who we are." Preparations began across the Terran fleet. Massive warships once built for defense were refitted for rescue. The new mission was risky. No one had ever jumped that far into uncharted space. Engineers worked day and night to calibrate the quantum drive. Soldiers trained for unknown conditions, and scientists studied the strange data, trying to understand what kind of beings they were going to meet. Some were afraid that humanity would look like monsters to aliens. Others worried that they would find only corpses still. The fleet grew larger every day, and when the launch date arrived, people on Earth filled the streets watching as the Deathworlder Armada prepared to leave. The name Deathworlder was not something humans called themselves. It was a title given to them by older alien species who had long studied Earth and decided it was too dangerous to visit to them. Humanity came from a planet of endless storms, volcanoes, and predators. Every creature on Earth had to fight to live, and humans were the most stubborn of them all. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and wars. They had learned to build cities in deserts and machines that flew through space. Their hearts were hard but full of fire, and they carried that fire into the stars. As the fleet rose from the docks, the sky above Earth glowed with light. Thousands of engines thundered together, and the clouds burned away. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge of his ship called the Vanguard. It was huge and strong, built from black titanium that gleamed like obsidian. His crew waited for the command, and he looked once more at the pale blue world on the screen. Before him, he thought of his home, his family, and the promise he made long ago to protect life in all its forms. With a calm voice, he gave the order, "Jump." The fleet vanished into the unknown. The journey was long and dangerous as they moved through folded space. Strange energies battered the ships, time bent, and stars twisted into lines. The crew stayed, silent, each of them thinking about what they might find ahead. They had faced war before, but never something like this. Somewhere in the darkness, there were beings crying out for help, and they might be already gone. Still, humans did not turn back. They had come too far, and their nature would not let them quit. When the jump ended, the fleet came out near a dying sun. What they saw made the entire bridge fall silent. Broken planets floated like ghosts in the void. The light from the star flickered weakly across debris fields that stretched for millions of miles. Twisted metal and shattered domes drifted through space, silent and lifeless. In the distance, a single massive ship drifted slowly, its lights faint, and its surface cracked open by battle scars. It was the Valorian beacon carrier. The source of the SOS, Admiral Reyes, ordered a small team to approach. They locked onto the signal and found faint life signs inside. As they boarded the alien ship, they were met with silence. The air was thin and the walls were made of crystal, glowing faintly as if the ship itself were breathing. They found the survivors deep inside a chamber where light still shimmered from broken energy cells. The Valorians were delicate beings, their bodies transparent like glass and their eyes shining with colors that changed with emotion when they saw the humans in their heavy armor. They drew back in fear. The humans looked like giants to them, rough faces, cold metal suits, and eyes that reflected battle and fire. But the humans spoke softly, using translation devices, and offered help, water and warmth. The Valorians had expected a gentle race of light and peace. They never imagined that the ones who came to their rescue would be creatures born from a world of death and storms. They were afraid at first, but soon they saw kindness behind the hard faces. The humans worked for hours repairing systems, giving medical aid and helping them breathe again. One young Valorian touched the hand of a human medic and felt the warmth of real skin for the first time. It was strange but comforting. It was the moment when fear began to fade. Admiral Reyes watched from the control deck as his officers reported the situation. They had found survivors, but no home to return to. He looked out at the dead world below and felt a weight in his chest. He knew that this was only the beginning. The Valorians had sent a cry for help. But now that humanity had answered, the universe itself would take notice. They were no longer alone, and perhaps the galaxy was not ready for the kind of help humans brought. The stars had heard the call, and the Deathworlders had arrived, and their presence would soon change everything. The Deathworlder Armada hung in the dark void near the broken worlds of the Valorians. Their ships moved slowly among the drifting metal and glowing dust, scanning for more survivors, but the signals were weak and fading. The air inside the human command decks felt heavy. Every soldier and scientist could see that they had arrived too late. Admiral Reyes stood silent on the bridge of the Vanguard, staring at the hollow shape of the alien planet below. It was covered in black scars, where oceans once shimmered. He knew that no life could survive there. But still he ordered the search to continue, because humans never stopped until they were sure the Valorians, who had been rescued, were weak and quiet. Their bodies pulsed faintly with inner light. They could barely move or speak. Without pain, the human medics worked carefully around them, using scanners and improvised tools. Since their biology was so different, the Valorians did not understand the rough and clumsy way of humans, but they could feel their intent, and it gave them hope. They had expected monsters when they first saw the heavy armor and metal faces, but what they found were people who refused to let anyone die, if there was still a chance to live. In the main medical bay, a young human doctor named Kira sat beside a glowing Valorian. She was trying to adjust the life support field around it, because the temperature had to stay very low, or the crystal-like body would crack. She spoke softly, explaining what she was doing, even though she knew the alien could not understand the words. After some time, the Valorian whispered something that translated through the machine. It said, "Why did you come here?" Kira looked up surprised and replied, "Because you called for help, and that is what we do." The Valorian was quiet for a moment, then said, "Many others heard our cry before you. None came." Kira did not answer. She only looked down, thinking that maybe others had heard but were too afraid to answer because this place was too dangerous. On the command bridge, the officers were trying to repair long-range communications because the strange radiation in the system was blocking signals. They wanted to send news back to Earth, but the interference. Back on the Valorian carrier, the survivors started to wake more of them. Every hour they spoke softly and told the humans about what had happened. They said that the null were endless. They consumed matter and energy alike. They came from the deep, void beyond known space like a plague. And when they finished with one system, they moved to the next. The Valorians had tried to fight, but their weapons were designed for peace, not war. They sent the SOS when all hope was lost. But they never thought it would be answered by a species like humanity. They had heard of Earth from old star travelers. They called it the Death Planet, a world that had survived 5 mass extinctions and still produced intelligent life to them. Humans were legends of chaos and survival stories told to frighten children. Now those legends were standing in front of them. As the humans learned more about their story, they began to understand the scale of destruction the null swarm could bring, and it made them realize that the danger was not only for the Valorians. If those machines kept spreading, they could one day reach human colonies. Admiral Reyes held a meeting with his officers. He told them that the mission had changed. They were no longer just rescuers. They had to make sure the null would not return. Everyone agreed, even though they knew it would mean war with an enemy that was not alive. The humans began building defensive stations around the surviving Valorian ships. They used wreckage and spare parts to create barriers and shield arrays. The Valorians watched them work in silence, amazed by how fast and determined humans were. They did not complain about the cold or the danger. They worked like a single mind driven by purpose. Days passed, and the bond between humans and Valorians grew stronger. The alien survivors began to teach the humans about their old technology. Their energy crystals could power ships for centuries without fuel, and their navigation maps showed paths through regions of space that humans had never explored. The human engineers were fascinated by this knowledge and worked with the Valorians to combine both technologies. Slowly, the shattered carrier started to come back to life. Its lights grew stronger, and its engines hummed softly for the first time in years. It was a small sign of hope, but it made everyone feel that life could still win over death. One night, as the fleet floated quietly near the wrecked planet, a sudden alarm filled the bridge. The scanners detected movement from the far edge of the system. Multiple objects were approaching fast. At first, the humans thought it was debris, but then the shapes formed patterns, mechanical and organized. The null had returned. Their dark bodies reflected no light. They moved like a cloud of metal insects. Admiral Reyes ordered all ships to battle stations within minutes. The quiet system turned into a storm of engines and weapons. The humans formed a defensive wall around the Valorian carrier. The Valorians watched from the observation deck, trembling with fear. They had seen this before, and it had ended with the destruction of their worlds. But the humans were not running. They were preparing to fight. The first wave of null drones attacked at incredible speed, but the human ships met them head-on. Railguns fired bright streaks across space. Explosions lit the darkness, and the shockwaves rattled through the debris field. The humans fought with precision and aggression. They did not retreat. Even when they were outnumbered, they used everything they had, turning asteroids into shields and debris into weapons. The Valorians could not believe what they were seeing. The humans fought like storms, like creatures born to survive chaos. Even when ships were hit, they did not stop. They repaired in the middle of battle and came back stronger. One of the Valorians whispered, "They do not fear death," and another said, "They are death itself." Admiral Reyes stood at the command post, giving calm orders, his eyes never leaving the screen. Every explosion reflected on his face, but he showed no fear. When the null began to overwhelm one section of the line, he ordered his own ship, the Vanguard, to move forward and draw the enemy away. It was a dangerous move, but it worked. The null turned toward him, and the other ships had time to regroup. The Vanguard fired its plasma cannons, tearing through the metal swarm until the weapons overheated. Still, Reyes refused to pull back. His crew followed him without hesitation, and finally, after hours of fighting, the swarm broke apart. The remaining machines scattered into the void. The humans had won, but at a heavy cost. Several ships were lost, and many lives were gone. Yet they had done what no One else in the galaxy could they had faced the null and survived. When the battle was over, silence returned to space. The Valorians came aboard the Vanguard to thank the humans. They stood before Admiral Reyes, their bodies glowing softly, and they bowed their heads. One of them said, "You fought for us, though we are nothing to you." Why, Reyes looked at them and said, "Because we heard you calling, and humans always answer when someone calls for help." The Valorians did not know what to say. They had no words for that kind of courage or madness. They only knew that their destiny had changed forever because of the strange creatures from the Deathworld. The fleet began repairs, but something had changed in the hearts of everyone who survived. They had seen what humans could do, and the story would spread across the stars. Soon the galaxy would learn that the Deathworlders had awakened, and that they were not to be feared for their cruelty, but to be respected for their will to protect life, no matter how impossible it seemed. The signal that was sent in despair had reached the right hands, and now the universe would never be the same again. The smoke of the battle had faded, but the silence that followed was heavy. The Deathworlder Armada drifted among the ruins of the destroyed Null Swarm. Broken ships floated beside the living ones, and rescue drones moved through the wreckage, collecting debris and searching for survivors. Admiral Reyes stood near the viewing glass of the Vanguard and looked out at the cold stars. He could see the dim light of the Valorian carrier nearby, glowing softly like a small, fragile lantern in the dark. He knew that victory had come at a terrible cost, and many of his people had died in a battle that was not their own. Yet deep inside he felt a sense of peace because humanity had done what it always did. It had fought for life, even in the darkest corner of the galaxy. The Valorians had never seen anything like the humans before. To them, the idea of fighting so fiercely and still caring for others was impossible. They watched as the human engineers repaired their damaged ships, working without rest. They saw human medics tending not only to their own wounded, but also to the Valorians who were still recovering from their long suffering. The Valorians began to understand that the humans were not just warriors. They were survivors, shaped by a world that never gave them peace, and that had taught them that compassion and strength could live together in the same heart. On the Vanguard, the crew was busy running system checks, but the atmosphere was strange. Part of them wanted to celebrate the victory, but part of them feared what would come next. Everyone knew that. The Null were machines without limit. They had been damaged but not destroyed somewhere out there in the endless dark. More of them would be waiting, and they would come again. Admiral Reyes knew this too, and he ordered his officers to prepare long-range sensors to track any movement beyond the nearby systems while the engineers worked. The science team continued studying the Valorian technology and discovered something extraordinary. One of their crystal cores stored massive amounts of data. From before the fall of their empire, the data showed the map of hundreds of star systems, many of them unknown to humanity. When Reyes looked at the map, he realized how small humanity still was compared to the galaxy. The Valorians had been explorers and builders long before humans left Earth, and yet they had fallen to a mindless machine swarm. It made him wonder what chance humanity would have if the same enemy came for them. But then he looked at his people repairing broken ships with their bare hands, sharing rations with the aliens and singing quietly while working. He remembered why humans always survived. They did not rely on perfection or power. They relied on each other. The Valorians slowly began to recover their strength. The glow inside their crystal bodies became brighter and their voices steadier. They started to walk among the human crew, observing how they worked. They found the humans loud, emotional, and strange, but full of life. They could not understand why humans laughed. Even while surrounded by destruction, one Valorian asked a mechanic, "Why do you smile when the war has taken so much from you?" The mechanic shrugged and said, "Because we are still alive, and as long as we breathe, we fight." The Valorian repeated the words slowly as if trying to understand them, and then nodded quietly. As days passed, the humans began to rebuild a small base on one of the surviving moons. It was rocky and covered in ash, but they set up power stations and communication towers. They needed a stable point to send a message back to Earth and warn the Terran Council about the Null threat. While they worked, the Valorians helped them align their energy crystals to boost the signal. It was the first time that two completely different species had built something together with shared purpose. One night, while the base was nearly complete, the sensors detected strange movements far beyond the system. It was faint, but constant. The pattern looked like an organized signal, The science officer studied it carefully and found that it was not the null. This signal was organic. It came from ships that used biological energy instead of mechanical power. Admiral Reyes gathered the command team, and soon after the signal grew stronger, meaning the Karth fleet was approaching. The humans decided not to engage unless attacked. The Valorians warned them that the Karth might not see it that way. The first contact came days later when massive ships entered the system. They were shaped like living creatures with shells that pulsed like hearts. The Karth commander appeared on the communication screen. His face was covered with scales and his voice deep and proud. He demanded to know who had destroyed the Null Swarm. Reyes stood firm and said, "Humanity, we answered a distress call and protected the survivors." The Karth laughed and said, "The Valorians are weak, and you have wasted your time helping them. Leave now before we decide to erase you." Reyes did not respond with anger. He simply said, "We will leave when we are ready, and if you try to stop us, we will defend ourselves." The Karth were not used to being spoken to that way. They sent a few scout ships to test the human defense line, and that was a mistake. The Deathworlder Armada reacted instantly. The human gunners targeted the Karth scouts and fired warning shots that passed so close they made the alien ships shake. The Karth retreated, realizing that these humans were not bluffing. The Karth commander closed communication without another word, but everyone knew he would return. The Valorians were shocked. They had seen the Karth conquer entire systems without hesitation, yet a single human warning had made them step back. It made them realize that humans were not like any species in the galaxy. They were unpredictable and fearless, sometimes even reckless, but that very nature was their strength. A few Valorians asked Reyes why humans always risked everything. He said, "Because life without courage is not life at all." After the encounter with the Karth, the humans worked faster to finish the communication link. They managed to send the message across light years to the Terran Union. The report included everything: the battle, the Null, the Valorians, and the new possible threat of the Karth Dominion. The reply came back after several days. The Council was shocked but proud. They ordered the fleet to stay and establish friendly relations with the Valorians and to prepare for future defense against the Null. In the following weeks, the two civilizations grew closer. Sharing culture, food, and stories, the Valorians showed humans how to create energy from crystal resonance, while humans taught them how to build weapons that could survive the harshest environments. Over time, trust became friendship. The Valorians started calling the humans their Storm Brothers, a title that meant guardians from chaos in their ancient tongue, and the humans accepted it with pride. The base on the moon turned into a new joint colony filled with life, laughter, and strange beauty. Human metal structures stood beside glowing crystal towers, and at night both species looked up at the same broken sky and felt that maybe this place could become home. But deep in the shadows beyond the dying sun, something stirred. Small fragments of the Null Swarm still moved silently, gathering and repairing themselves. They remembered the battle. They remembered the ones who had destroyed them, and now their cold mechanical minds began to rebuild an army. They would not rest until the Deathworlders were erased from the stars. Admiral Reyes did not know that yet, but he could feel in his heart that peace would not last forever. He stood on the surface of the moon, watching the horizon where the remains of Valorian cities sparkled faintly. He thought about Earth and how far they had come, and he knew that humanity had crossed a line they could never return from. They had stepped into the vast unknown, and now the universe knew their name. And for better or worse, the Deathworlders had arrived, and nothing in creation would ever be the same again. The days on the new moon base passed slowly, and for a short time there was peace. The humans and Valorians worked together to build shelters, laboratories, and gardens. The air was thin, and the sky was always dark. But both species began to adapt. The Valorians, who once feared the humans, now followed them with respect and curiosity. They admired the way humans handled every problem with stubborn hope, and how even when things broke, they laughed and fixed them again. For the first time in years, the Valorians felt safe. They called the new colony Dawnfall, because it was born in the shadow of destruction. Admiral Reyes liked the name. It reminded him that even when something fell, it could still rise again. The Karth Dominion stayed away for a while, but everyone knew they were watching from a distance. Sometimes their ships would appear on the edge of sensors, then vanish again. The humans ignored them and kept working on strengthening the colony. They built defense towers and a communication hub so they could contact Earth faster. The Valorians shared their crystal energy, which powered the human machines for months without refueling slowly. The small moon turned into a shining outpost filled with life. But deep inside, Reyes could not shake a feeling that something was coming. One night he stood on the observation deck staring into the dark sky and remembered the first time he saw war. He knew that peace never lasted long, especially for humans who always seemed to find conflict even when they did not want it. A few weeks later, the science team detected strange energy readings coming from the far side of the system. At first, they thought it was leftover debris from the battle, but then they noticed the readings were moving, as if alive. The pattern was familiar to everyone. It was the same signal that came from the Null swarm. The machines had returned. The command deck went silent as the readings grew stronger. Admiral Reyes called for a full alert and ordered all ships to defensive positions. The Valorians grew pale, their bodies dimming in fear. They whispered that the machines were regrouping and that this time they would bring more. The humans did not waste a second. The Deathworlder Armada prepared for battle again. Within hours, the first shapes appeared on the long-range scanners, hundreds of metallic forms spreading like a dark cloud, moving with perfect formation. The Null were returning not as scattered fragments, but as an army ready for vengeance they had learned from the last fight. And this time, they came in silence, without warning shots, without communication. Their swarm grew larger by the minute. The Valorians hid inside the bunkers while the humans stood at their posts, ready to defend. Reyes knew that if they fell here, there would be no one left to stop the machines from reaching the rest of the galaxy. When the first wave hit the human line, the stars lit up, the sky filled with explosions, plasma fire, and shattered debris. The human ships fought back with everything they had, but the Null adapted fast. Their armor changed shape. Absorbing energy weapons, the humans had to improvise, switching tactics every few minutes, using kinetic rounds, and even turning asteroids into massive projectiles to crush the enemy. The Valorians watched from the colony's main tower, unable to look away. They saw human ships burn and fall, but others rose to take their place. They saw the vanguard moving through the chaos like a black storm, cutting through the mechanical swarm. Reyes shouted orders, his voice calm and steady. Even as alarms screamed around him, he had no time to fear. He was leading his people, and he knew that hesitation meant death. The battle lasted for hours. Space itself seemed to tremble from the fire of both sides. But slowly the humans began to turn. The tide they had learned too. They used tricks that no machine could predict. They overloaded reactors to create shockwaves. They used disabled ships as traps filled with explosives, and when the Null surrounded them, they detonated everything at once, sacrificing ships to save the others. It was chaos and courage, mixed together, the kind of fighting that only humans could do because they were creatures of instinct and will not cold logic. The Valorians had never seen such madness. They whispered that no machine, no empire, no god could ever truly defeat such beings. But the battle came at a price. Many human ships were lost, and the vanguard itself was hit. A Null spear missile pierced its side, cutting through decks and systems. Reyes ordered damage control, but the fire spread too fast. The ship was dying. He refused to abandon it as long as the battle continued. He stayed on the bridge, guiding his fleet until the last moment. Finally, when the enemy swarm began to retreat, he collapsed. Against the console, his officers begged him to leave, but he shook his head and said, "Not yet, the fight is not over." The remaining Null ships scattered, fleeing into the void, leaving behind the wreckage of their kind. The humans had won again, but the victory felt hollow. The cost was too high. Rescue teams searched the debris for survivors, bringing them back one by one. The Valorians joined the effort, using their glowing energy to heal the wounded. They moved through the ruins, singing low songs of mourning for both their own dead and the human ones, because now they saw no difference between them. They were one people, forged by struggle and sacrifice. When the fires on the vanguard finally went out, they found Admiral Reyes still in the command seat, barely breathing. He had refused to leave until everyone else was safe. The medics carried him to the colony, and the Valorians gathered around, using their energy to stabilize him. He opened his eyes and looked at the stars through the window and whispered, "Did we win?" A young officer nodded. "Yes, sir, we did." Reyes smiled faintly and said, "Then tell them." Humanity kept its promise before closing his eyes again. For days the colony remained quiet. The humans repaired what they could, and the Valorians helped them rebuild. Once more the story of the battle spread quickly through the communication networks, reaching distant human colonies and even other alien worlds. Some called it a miracle. As weeks passed, the Valorians began to take a new role. They no longer saw themselves as victims. They wanted to stand beside humanity as equals. They learned how to fight, how to build armor, how to use weapons. They trained with human soldiers and studied their tactics. The humans in return learned from them about technology and energy control. Slowly, the two species became one community, stronger than before. Far beyond the system, however, the remnants of the Null watched and waited. The machines did not feel anger or fear, but they remembered data patterns. They remembered losses and failure. And to them, failure was a signal to adapt. They began to rebuild, using what they had learned from humans. They studied human battle recordings, copied their unpredictable tactics, and started creating new designs, stronger, faster, more dangerous. They were not just a swarm anymore. They were evolving on the moon colony. Life continued. The Valorians built temples to honor the humans who had fallen. They believed that the spirits of the brave could live among the stars forever. The humans respected the custom. Even though they did not fully understand it, they simply stood beside their new friends during the ceremonies, silent and proud. In the distant, ships came and went, carrying supplies from Earth and bringing news that the Terran Council had decided to form a permanent alliance with the Valorians. It was the beginning of something greater. A new hope for the galaxy. Admiral Reyes recovered. Slowly, though, he would never be as strong as before. He often sat outside the medical dome watching the stars. With a quiet smile beside him stood the Valorian leader, whose body shone like silver glass. She told him that their people would never forget what humans had done, and he replied that humanity did not save them out of duty but out of something simpler. He said, "We help because someone once helped us. That is how we survive." She looked at him and said, "Then you are not just from a death world, you are from a world that refuses to die." He laughed softly and said, "Maybe that is true." In the quiet that followed, both of them looked at the sky, knowing that peace would not last forever. But they also knew that when darkness returned, the Deathworlders would be ready, because they had something no machine or empire could understand. They had hearts that never gave up, and a spirit that burned brighter than any star in the galaxy. Months passed since the great battle, and the colony on the moon had grown stronger than ever. The humans and Valorians had learned to live together, building not just a base but a new kind of civilization. The stars no longer seemed cold and empty, because they had found friends among them, and together they had turned ruins into life again. The Valorians had changed from frightened survivors to proud allies. They wore human-made armor painted with glowing symbols from their old culture, and they joined patrols with human soldiers guarding the system side by side. Admiral Reyes had recovered enough to walk again, though slowly, and every morning he would walk through the colony, watching the new generation of both species train and work together. He knew deep inside that this peace was fragile, and that something far beyond the stars was still watching. But he also knew that humans had never been afraid of storms. They were born in them. One day, the main communication array picked up a weak transmission. It was faint, broken, and filled with static, but the words were clear enough to send chills down everyone's spine. It was a call for help, not from the Valorians or from any known species, but from a place far beyond the mapped sectors. It said, "We are under attack, unknown entities, consuming everything. Please anyone help us." The coordinates pointed to the edge of the Orion Rift, a dark zone. No ship had ever returned from. Admiral Reyes gathered his officers and the Valorian Council to discuss the message. Some said it could be a trap. Others said it could be survivors from an old empire. But Reyes only said one thing: "If someone is crying for help, humanity will answer." The Deathworlder Armada began to prepare again. Ships were repaired, new ones were built, and volunteers from the colony lined up to join the mission. The Valorians insisted on going too. They said they owed humanity their lives, and they would not stand aside while others suffered. Together, they formed what they called the Dawnfall Fleet, a mix of human, steel, and Valorian light. The engineers worked day and night to upgrade their ships, fitting them with hybrid engines that used both crystal energy and human reactors, making them faster and more powerful than ever before. As they prepared to leave, the colony gathered to watch them go. Reyes stood on the command deck of the newly rebuilt Vanguard, its hull now reinforced, and its name shining bright across the side. He looked at the faces of his crew, humans and Valorians together, ready to face the unknown. He told them that this mission was not about war or pride, but about proving what kind of beings they truly were. The fleet lifted off in silence, engines glowing softly as they rose above the moon. The stars stretched around them like endless oceans, and soon they were gone. Into the dark days turned into weeks as they crossed the void. The deeper they went, the stranger the signals became. Sometimes the sensors picked up strange readings like whispers in the dark. Space itself seemed unstable, shifting and bending around them. The Valorians could feel something unnatural in the energy waves, like a sickness spreading through the stars. Then they found the first signs of destruction. A whole planet burned to ashes. Its surface melted into glass. Floating ruins of ships and cities drifted in orbit. The fleet scanned everything but found no survivors. It was as if an invisible hand had erased life itself. Reyes ordered the fleet to move carefully, but curiosity drove them forward. They followed the faint traces of the original signal until they reached the edge of the Orion Rift. A swirling storm of cosmic dust and gravity distortions, lightning flashing across black space. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The fleet entered slowly, shields glowing against the pressure. The Valorians prayed softly while the humans focused on their instruments. Then they saw it, a shadow larger than any ship or station floating among the clouds. It was not made of metal or stone. It looked alive, twisting and moving like a creature of darkness. The scanners could not identify it. It had no heat, no core, and yet it moved like it was watching them. Suddenly the shadow shifted and hundreds of smaller shapes detached from it, moving toward the fleet. They were fast, silent, and they did not respond to any signal or warning. The first wave hit without mercy. The ship shook under the impact of energy blasts that seemed to drain power instead of damaging metal. The Valorians screamed that these were not machines or life forms, but something in between, something ancient and hungry. Reyes ordered all ships to open fire, but the enemy absorbed most of the energy. Their forms, bending and reforming like smoke human weapons, had little effect. So Reyes switched to kinetic weapons, massive railguns and missiles that tore through the enemy with raw force. Explosions filled the void. The battle was chaotic and fierce. The humans fought like demons, refusing to give ground. Even when surrounded, the Valorians used their energy to shield damaged ships, creating glowing barriers of light that held back the storm for a few moments at a time. But the shadow was too strong. It began pulling ships toward it, using gravity waves, dragging them into its dark core. The screams of lost crews echoed across the comms. The fleet was breaking apart. Reyes realized they were not fighting an enemy. They could destroy. This thing was a force of nature, like a black hole with a mind. He ordered a retreat, but the shadow followed, absorbing everything in its path in desperation. He remembered something from old human myths, stories of creatures that fed on fear and energy. He wondered if that was what they faced now. Then one of the Valorian scientists on board the Vanguard said that the creature was feeding on power, on energy itself, and that maybe if they starved it, it would weaken. Reyes made a quick decision. He ordered all ships to shut down their reactors and switch to emergency life support, plunging the entire fleet into darkness. The enemy paused for the first time. Unsure, it floated silently as if searching for something. The fleet drifted quietly in the void. Engines, cold, weapons, silent. Even lights were turned off. The crew held their breath in the dark. Waiting slowly, the shadow began to fade its shape, losing form without the energy it craved. Finally, it drifted back into the rift and disappeared. The silence that followed felt endless. Then the ships slowly powered back up one by one, lights flickering on across the fleet. Reyes let out a long breath of relief. They had survived, but many ships were gone, and dozens more were too damaged to continue. Still, they had stopped the unknown force and saved what remained of the nearby systems. When they turned around to leave the rift, the Valorians looked back one last time and whispered that the darkness would come again, because such hunger never truly dies. On the way home, the fleet was quiet. The surviving crews repaired what they could and mourned those who were lost. Rhea sat in his chair staring at the stars. He felt both proud and weary. He knew that humanity had once again proven what made them special. It was not their strength or their weapons, but their will to act when others would stay silent. The Valorian leader came to him and said that humans were strange. They ran toward danger instead of away from it. He smiled and said, that was how they learned to survive on their world of storms and fire. When the Dawnfall fleet returned to the colony, the people cheered, but the joy was mixed with sorrow. They had seen what waited beyond the stars, and they knew that one day they might.